They dragged me into federal court like a cautionary tale, calling me the failed daughter and the broke CEO. My mother cried so hard the room went quiet while my father nodded like he had rehearsed it in the mirror. Then the judge stopped mid-sentence, lifted a folder marked tax transcripts, and asked one simple question. He wanted to know why the records showed the money never went to my company, but to an account his client controlled. My name is Lydia Turner, and at 37 years old, I am sitting in the defendant's chair of a federal bankruptcy courtroom in Richmond, Virginia, watching my entire life being dismantled by the people who gave me that life. The air in the courtroom is stale, recycled, and freezing. It smells of floor wax and anxious sweat. Every time the heavy mahogany doors at the back open, a sliver of the humid Virginia afternoon slips in, but it is quickly strangled by the climate control. I keep my hands folded on the table in front of me. I am focusing on the grain of the wood. If I look up, I will see the gallery packed with reporters, industry competitors, and former colleagues who have come to watch the public execution of the founder of Slatebridge Systems. They are here to see the failed daughter and the broke CEO get what she allegedly deserves. My younger sister, Brielle Caldwell, is sitting at the plaintiff's table 10 feet to my right. She is wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost $4,000, tailored to project a specific kind of innocent competence. Her blonde hair is pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She is not looking at me. She is staring straight ahead at the empty witness stand. Her chin lifted just enough to suggest moral superiority. She looks calm. She looks smug. She looks like she has already won because, in her world, she always wins. Behind her, in the first row of the gallery, sit our parents, Mary Ann and Gordon Caldwell. My mother, Mary Ann, is dabbing at her eyes with a linen handkerchief. She is performing the role of the heartbroken matriarch with Oscar-worthy dedication. Her shoulders shake just enough to be visible to Judge Halverson, but not enough to ruin the line of her silk blouse. My father, Gordon, sits beside her like a granite statue. He is stone-faced, his jaw set in that familiar line of disappointment I have known since I was 6 years old. He nods solemnly. Every time Brielle's lawyer makes a point, a rhythmic confirmation of my apparent failures. Your Honor, Brielle's attorney says. His name is Sterling, and he has a voice that sounds like expensive bourbon poured over gravel. He walks toward the bench, gesturing vaguely in my direction as if I were a contagious disease. We are not here out of malice. We are here out of necessity. The Caldwell family has extended every possible grace to Ms. Turner. They have offered support. They have offered guidance. And finally, they offered a financial lifeline of $2 million to save her company, Slatebridge Systems, from immediate collapse. I feel the muscles in my neck tighten. Collapse. Slatebridge is posting record efficiency numbers. We just cleared a provisional audit for a federal contract, but the truth does not matter here. Only the narrative matters, and the narrative Sterling is weaving is devastating. Ms. Turner took that money, Sterling continues, turning to face the gallery, ensuring the reporters catch his good side. She claimed it was a short-term loan to cover payroll and compliance updates. Instead, the money vanished. And now, she refuses to acknowledge the debt exists. She is insolvent, Your Honor. She is hiding behind a veil of corporate jargon while her own sister faces the financial repercussions of trusting her. I can feel the eyes of the room boring into the back of my neck. I want to stand up. I want to scream that Slatebridge has $3 million in liquid reserves. I want to scream that I haven't taken a dime from my parents since I left their house at 22. But I do not move. Beside me, my attorney, Renee Parkman, is a study in unnatural stillness. She is not writing notes. She is not shuffling papers. She is sitting with her back perfectly straight, her hands resting lightly on a thick manila folder. She told me to be a statue. She told me to let them talk until they ran out of air. We call Gordon Caldwell to the stand, Sterling announces. My father stands up. He buttons his jacket. He walks to the witness box with the heavy, purposeful stride of a man who owns warehouses and fleets of trucks. He takes the oath without hesitation. Mr. Caldwell, Sterling asks, his voice softening into false sympathy. Tell the court about the nature of this loan. Gordon clears his throat. He looks at me for the first time. His eyes are cold, devoid of any recognition that I am his daughter. I am just a problem to be fixed, an error in the ledger. Lydia has always been ambitious, Gordon says. He chooses the word like it is an insult. But she lacks the discipline for the logistics world. About 3 years ago, she came to us. She was desperate. She said Slatebridge was going under. She said she would lose everything. He pauses, letting the lie settle in the room like dust. We didn't want to enable her, he continues, his voice dipping into a practiced register of paternal regret. But she is family. We agreed to a private loan, $2 million. It was a handshake deal, backed by a promissory note she signed in my study. We trusted her. And has she repaid any of this principal? Sterling asks. Not a cent, Gordon says. She stopped answering our calls 6 months ago. Thank you. Mr. Caldwell. Gordon steps down. He looks at the judge and gives a small, weary nod. It is perfect. He looks like a titan of industry who has been burned by his own soft heart. Then it is Marianne's turn. If Gordon was the logic, Marianne is the emotion. She takes the stand and immediately looks at me with tear-filled eyes. I just don't understand how it came to this, she sobs into the microphone. The court reporter flinches at the sudden volume. We gave her every chance. We paid for her education. We introduced her to the right people. When Brielle told me she had to sue to get the family's investment back, I begged her not to, but Lydia leaves us no choice. She treats us like enemies. She breaks down then, burying her face in her hands. The sound of her weeping fills the silence of the courtroom. It is a sound I know well. It is the sound she used to get upgraded tables at restaurants. It is the sound she used to guilt me into canceling vacations to work unpaid shifts at the family warehouse. The witness may step down, Judge Halverson says gently. Even he seems moved. He is an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that looks like it has been carved out of oak. He leans back in his chair, looking from my weeping mother to me. I look like a monster. I know I do. I am the stoic, cold-hearted daughter sitting dry-eyed while her mother falls apart. Sterling returns to the podium. He places his hands on the lectern, exuding the confidence of a man closing a slam-dunk case. Your Honor, Sterling says, the evidence is clear. The promissory note is signed. The affidavit from Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell is sworn. The defendant is broke. Her company is a shell. We ask for an immediate summary judgment to freeze the assets of Slatebridge Systems and appoint a trustee to oversee the liquidation of assets to repay the $2 million debt owed to my client, Brielle Caldwell. He sits down. Brielle reaches over and squeezes his arm. She doesn't smile, but I can see the tension leaving her shoulders. She thinks it is over. Renee Parkman clears her throat. It is a small sound, but in the hush of the courtroom, it sounds like a gunshot. Ms. Parkman, Judge Halverson says, shifting his attention to our table. Do you have any cross-examination or witnesses? Renee stands up. She does not walk to the podium. She stays standing at our table. She picks up the thick manila folder she has been guarding for the last hour. No witnesses, Your Honor, Renee says. Her voice is cool, crisp, and utterly devoid of theatrics. However, the defense moves to submit new evidence into the record, evidence that was obtained via subpoena from the IRS and the recipient bank at 9 o'clock this morning. Sterling half rises from his chair. Objection. We haven't seen this evidence. This is an ambush. It is a bankruptcy hearing. Mr. Sterling, not a civil trial, Judge Halverson says, his eyebrows knitting together. I have broad discretion to review financial records relevant to the solvency of the debtor. Bring it up. Counsel. Renee walks to the bench. She hands the folder to the clerk, who passes it to the judge. Renee hands a copy to Sterling. Sterling opens the folder. I watch his face. For a second, nothing happens. He scans the first page. Then he blinks. He flips to the second page. His mouth opens slightly, then snaps shut. He looks at Brielle. Brielle is frowning, trying to read the papers over his shoulder. Judge Halverson puts on his reading glasses. He opens the folder. The room goes silent. The only sound is the hum of the air conditioner and the wet, sniffling sounds of my mother in the front row. The judge reads the first page. He turns it over. He reads the second page. He stops. He lifts his head and looks at the ceiling for a moment, as if calculating something. Then he looks back down at the documents. He runs a finger down a column of numbers. "Mr. Sterling," the judge says. His voice has changed. The grandfatherly warmth is gone. It has been replaced by something sharp and metallic. "Yes, Your Honor." Sterling's voice is a little higher than it was a moment ago. "You stated, on the record, that the $2 million in question was a direct loan to Ms. Turner's company, Slatebridge Systems. That is correct, Your Honor. The promissory note?" "Forget the note," Judge Halverson interrupts. He does not shout, but the command snaps like a whip. The judge removes his glasses. He sets them on the desk. He folds his hands over the open file. "These are certified tax transcripts and wire transfer records corresponding to the date of the alleged loan," the judge says. "I am looking at the outflow of $2 million from the Caldwell Family Trust." Marianne's sobbing abruptly changes tempo. It doesn't fade out naturally. It stops dead, like someone reached over and turned a dial on a radio. The sudden silence from the gallery is jarring. Gordon is not nodding anymore. He is staring at the back of Brielle's head. Judge Halverson leans forward. The leather of his chair creaks. "According to these federal records," the judge says, speaking very slowly, enunciating every syllable. "The money did not go to Slatebridge Systems. It did not go to Lydia Turner. It did not go to any account associated with the defendant." Brielle's smile cracks. It is a tiny fracture, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. But I see it. Her eyes dart to Sterling, then to the judge, then, for the first time, to me. I do not smile. I do not frown. I just stare back at her. I have been waiting for this moment for 3 years. I have eaten instant noodles and worked 20-hour days and let them call me a failure while I built the trap she just walked into. "Your Honor, I am sure there is a clerical error," Sterling stammers. He is shuffling the papers in his hand, looking for an exit that isn't there. "The routing numbers." "Someone in this courtroom is lying to me," Judge Halverson says. The words hang in the air, heavy and dangerous. The judge picks up a specific sheet of paper from the folder. He holds it up. It is a wire transfer confirmation, enlarged and clear. He looks directly at Brielle's table. He does not look at the lawyer. He looks at my sister. "Counsel," the judge says, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "Explain this account number." To understand why a judge asking about a single bank account number felt like a bomb going off in my chest, you have to understand the soil I grew up in. I was raised in Norfolk, Virginia, where the air is thick with the smell of diesel, salt water, and old money, in my family. Affection was not a natural resource. It was a transaction. It was a dividend paid out quarterly, contingent on performance. My father, Gordon Caldwell, built the Caldwell Meridian Group from a regional trucking outfit into a logistics empire that moved freight across 3 oceans. To the outside world, he was a titan of industry. To me, he was a walking performance review. I was the firstborn, in a normal family. That might have meant something, but in the Caldwell dynasty, I was merely the draft copy. I was the practice run before they got the production model right. My sister, Brielle, arrived 8 years after me. By the time she was born, the business had exploded. I grew up in a house where we worried about the cost of fleet maintenance. Brielle grew up in a mansion where she worried about which pony she wanted to ride on Tuesdays. From the moment she could walk. Brielle was the golden child. It was not subtle. It was atmospheric. It was in the way the lighting in a room seemed to shift toward her. My parents treated her not as a child to be raised, but as an heirloom to be polished. While I was doing homework at the kitchen table, trying to make myself invisible, Brielle was being paraded in front of investors in velvet dresses, smiling that practiced, camera-ready smile. Gordon had a philosophy about legacy. He liked to say that a true dynasty required two things: a face and a spine. Brielle was the face. She was given private etiquette tutors, introduction lessons, and internships that consisted mostly of lunching with senators' daughters. She was taught how to walk into a room and own it. She was taught that her opinion mattered simply because she was a Caldwell. I, on the other hand, was the spine. And the thing about spines is that nobody is supposed to see them. They are just supposed to hold everything up until they snap. I spent my teenage years trying to earn my way into the family photograph. I thought if I worked harder than anyone else, if I was smarter, faster, and more competent, my father would finally look at me the way he looked at his ships. I didn't want to be the princess. I wanted to be the lieutenant. So, while Brielle was at cheer camp, I was filing shipping manifests in the basement of the corporate headquarters while she was learning French. I was learning the harmonized tariff schedule. I studied tax law and accounting in college, not because I had a passion for the tax code, but because I realized the family business was bleeding money through compliance errors. I thought if I could save them $1 million, they would love me $1 million worth. I was naive. I remember coming home from university with a degree in forensic accounting, graduating summa cum laude. I placed my diploma on my father's desk. He didn't look up from his paperwork. He just slid a stack of vendor contracts toward me and told me to check them for liability clauses. "Good," he said. "We need someone reliable to handle the boring stuff so Brielle doesn't get bogged down." That was the word that haunted me. Reliable. It sounds like a compliment, but in my family, it was a designation of servitude. A reliable car is the one you drive into the ground. A reliable employee is the one you don't have to pay well because they are too afraid to leave. My mother, Marianne, was the enforcer of this caste system. She policed our roles with terrifying precision. To her, my ambition was messy. It was unladylike. She would watch me reading trade journals at breakfast and wrinkle her nose as if I were chewing with my mouth open. "Lydia, really," she would say, adjusting the fresh flowers that the housekeeper had arranged. "You are always so intense. It puts people off. Look at Brielle. She's relaxed. She glows. You just frown." The resentment didn't happen all at once. It was a slow accumulation, like silt blocking a harbor. It built up over 1,000 small moments where I was asked to step out of the frame so the photographer could get a better shot of Brielle. But the breaking point, the moment the silt hardened into concrete, happened at the company's 40th anniversary dinner. It was a black tie affair at the Cavalier Hotel. 500 guests, senators, Port Authority directors, and competitors were all there to kiss the ring. I had spent 3 months organizing the event. I had negotiated the catering contracts, managed the guest list, and personally audited the quarterly report that was being distributed in the gift bags to ensure the numbers looked robust. I had saved the company $40,000 on venue fees alone by catching a clause in the fine print. I was wearing a simple navy dress because Marianne had told me not to wear anything distracting. Brielle arrived late, wearing a shimmering gold gown that looked like it was spun from light. When dinner was served, Gordon tapped his spoon against his champagne glass. The room went silent. He stood up, looking every inch the patriarch, flushed with success and expensive scotch. 40 years, he boomed. 40 years of building Caldwell Meridian. But a man doesn't build for himself. He builds for the future. He turned to our table. I straightened my back. I had just streamlined the entire Western distribution network. I was the reason the profit margins were up 2% this quarter. "I want to make a toast," Gordon said, beaming, "to the future of this company, to the person who embodies the spirit, the charisma, and the vision of the next generation, to my daughter, Brielle." The room erupted in applause. Brielle stood up, waving gracefully, feigning surprise. She had never spent a single day on the warehouse floor. She couldn't tell a bill of lading from a lunch menu. I sat frozen. My hands were in my lap, clenching the napkins so hard my knuckles were white. Gordon wasn't finished. He gestured for everyone to sit, then looked down the table at me. He didn't use the microphone this time, but his voice carried clearly enough for the board members sitting nearby to hear. "Lydia," he said, "the catering manager says there is an issue with the valet validation for the VIPs. Go handle that. Would you? We don't want the senator waiting for his car." I stared at him. He was asking me to leave my own family's celebration, a celebration I had organized, to go park cars. "Now, Lydia," Marianne whispered, kicking me gently under the table. "Don't make a scene. Be helpful." I looked at Brielle. She was sipping her champagne, smiling at me over the rim of the glass. It wasn't a malicious smile. It was worse. It was a pitying smile. It was the smile you give to the staff. That was the night the engine inside me changed gears. I stood up. I didn't say a word. I walked out of the ballroom, past the valet stand, and I kept walking. I didn't go handle the validation. I went to my car, drove to the beach, and sat in the dark, watching the container ships move across the horizon. I realized then that competence would never beat favoritism. I could generate billions in revenue, and I would still just be the clerk they trusted to count the money for the princess. That was when I started working on Slatebridge. It began as a way to vent my frustration. I knew the logistics industry was rotting from the inside. It was built on handshake deals, paper logs, and an old boy network that ignored safety regulations if the price was right. I saw the fraud every day in my father's office, the weight limits ignored, the maintenance logs falsified, the compliance checks skipped. Gordon called it smart business. I called it a ticking time bomb. I started writing code at night. I didn't know how to code at first, so I bought books. I watched tutorials at 3 a.m. I used my accounting background to reverse engineer the problems. I wanted to build a system that made lying impossible, a digital ledger that tracked every container, every safety check, every liter of fuel in a way that couldn't be erased by a charismatic smile or a golf course handshake. I worked in secret. I knew if my parents found out, they would mock it, or worse, they would take it. Gordon hated technology. He saw it as a threat to his authority. "Real assets beat computer guesses," he used to say. He liked things he could kick. He liked leverage he could hold over people. My project, which I codenamed Slatebridge, was the opposite of everything Caldwell Meridian stood for. It was transparent. It was objective. It was fair. One evening, about 6 months after the dinner, I made the mistake of leaving a prototype interface open on my laptop when I went to the kitchen to get water. Marianne walked past the dining room table. When I came back, she was staring at the screen, her lips pursed. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a compliance tracker," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "For the shipping routes," she laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound. "Oh, Lydia, always with the charts and the little rules. You know your father hates when you complicate things. Why don't you focus on helping Brielle with the charity gala? She needs someone to manage the seating chart. I'm building something." "Mother," I said, "something real." She reached out and closed my laptop. The snap of the lid echoed in the room. "You are a Caldwell," she said, her voice dropping to that cold, instructive tone. "We don't build things. We own the people who build things. Stop trying to prove you are smart. Lydia, it just makes you look desperate. It's unattractive." She patted my cheek and walked away. That touch burned more than a slap. It was the confirmation of everything I had feared. They didn't just prefer Brielle. They actively needed me to be small so she could look big. They needed me to be the failure so she could be the success. My role in the family ecosystem was to be the compost that allowed the flower to grow. I packed my laptop that night. I didn't leave the house yet. I couldn't afford to. Not with the student loans I was paying off because Gordon didn't believe in handouts for my second degree. But mentally, I was already gone. I looked around my room, at the polite, beige walls Marianne had chosen, at the sensible furniture, at the life that had been curated for me. I realized that if I stayed, I would die here. Not physically, but the part of me that mattered would wither away until I was just a bitter woman checking coats at my sister's parties. I knew I had to leave. And I knew that when I did, They would come for me, not because they missed me, but because they owned me. That night, as I stared at the ceiling, I finally understood the terms of my existence in the Caldwell family. They didn't want me successful. They wanted me dependent. My obsession began with a lie I found on a Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing a stack of shipping manifests for a cross-country haul of industrial chemicals. The paperwork claimed the cargo weighed 40,000 pounds and consisted of non-hazardous cleaning solvents. But when I cross-referenced the fuel consumption logs for the trucks carrying that load, the math did not add up. The trucks were burning diesel as if they were hauling 60,000 pounds. I dug deeper. Pulling the driver's rest logs and the weigh station timestamps, the drivers were bypassing scales. The cargo was not cleaning solvent. It was a volatile industrial acid that required specialized containment that cost 3 times as much as standard shipping. My family's company was pocketing the difference and putting drivers on the road with ticking time bombs, all to squeeze an extra 4% profit margin out of a contract. That was the spark. I realized that the entire logistics industry was running on a handshake system that was dangerously outdated. It was a world of paper trails that could be shredded and spreadsheets that could be edited. What the industry needed was a truth engine. I spent the next 6 months building the skeleton of Slatebridge Systems. I did not know how to code complex algorithms yet, so I built the logic on a massive whiteboard in my bedroom. I designed a system that would automatically cross-reference 17 different data points: fuel burn, GPS timestamps, weather delays, electronic logging device data, and publicly filed bill of lading records to flag anomalies instantly. It would make fraud mathematically impossible to hide. When I finally had a working simulation, I requested a meeting with my father. I did not do it at the dinner table. I booked a formal appointment through his secretary, treating him like the CEO he was, hoping he would treat me like the innovator I was trying to be. I walked into his office with a pitch deck and a tablet. Gordon was signing checks, the scratching of his fountain pen the only sound in the room. He gestured for me to sit, but did not stop writing. I pitched for 10 minutes. I showed him the fuel discrepancies. I showed him the liability exposure. I showed him how Slatebridge could save Caldwell Meridian $3 million a year in insurance premiums alone. "It is an automated compliance shield," I said, my voice trembling slightly with adrenaline. "It stops the fines before they happen. It makes us the safest carrier on the East Coast." Gordon finally capped his pen. He looked at the tablet, then at me. He let out a short, dry chuckle. "Lydia," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "you have always loved your homework. But out here, in the real world, flexibility is an asset. Sometimes a truck needs to be heavy. Sometimes a log needs to be corrected. That is how business gets done." "It is illegal, Dad," I said. "I buy." "And it is dangerous." "It is logistics," he corrected sharply. "Real assets beat computer guesses every time. You cannot put a microchip in a handshake." He slid the tablet back across the desk toward me, dismissing the work of half a year with a single shove. "However," he added, "I am glad you are thinking about efficiency. Brielle is taking over the client relations division next month. She needs someone to manage the back-end contracts and keep her organized. I think you should work under her. It would be good for you to support your sister." The air left the room. Work under Brielle. I was 30 years old. I had 2 degrees and a product that could revolutionize the sector. And he wanted me to be her secretary. "No," I said. Gordon blinked. "Excuse me." "No," I repeated. I stood up. I picked up my tablet. "I am not working for Brielle, and I am not bearing this." "If you walk out that door with this nonsense," Gordon said, his voice dropping to a low growl, "you are on your own. No trust fund, no allowance, no family rate on your apartment. You are done." "I know," I said. I walked out. I did not slam the door. I closed it softly, sealing the tomb of my former life. 2 days later, I moved into a second-floor walk-up in Petersburg, Virginia, about 40 minutes south of the city. The rent was $800 a month. The apartment smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and damp drywall. My view was not the ocean. It was the brick wall of a tire shop and a dumpster that was emptied twice a week at 4 in the morning. My office was a folding card table I bought at a thrift store for $12. One of the legs was shorter than the others, so I had to prop it up with a stack of old magazines. The glamour of the startup life is a lie told by billionaires in hoodies. The reality is panic. The reality is staring at a bank account balance of $400 and deciding between paying the internet bill or buying fresh produce. I chose the internet. I ate rice and beans for 3 weeks straight. I hustled. I went on freelance platforms and offered to review legal contracts for $50 a pop. I did bookkeeping for a local bakery. I took temp jobs data entering medical records. I worked 16 hours a day just to keep the lights on. And then, from midnight until 4 in the morning, I built SlateBridge. I taught myself Python and SQL. I scoured GitHub for open source libraries. I lived on caffeine and spite every time I wanted to quit. I imagined Brielle sitting in her corner office, taking credit for work she did not understand, and I typed faster. My first break was tiny. I found a regional freight cooperative, a group of independent truckers who were getting hammered by insurance audits. I cold called the head of the co-op, a guy named Miller. "I can lower your audit risk by 60%, I told him. "I cannot pay you up front," Miller said. "I have got nothing." "Pay me 10% of what I save you," I countered. He agreed. I installed a beta version of SlateBridge on their server. In the first week, the system flagged 3 drivers who were falsifying rest breaks and 1 dispatcher who was skimming fuel surcharges. I saved the co-op $12,000 in that first month. Miller cut me a check for $1,200. I stared at that check for an hour. It was not enough to buy a designer handbag. It was barely enough to cover rent and server costs. But it was mine. It was proof that I was not crazy. Then came the lesson that nearly broke me. I met a man at a tech mixer in Richmond. Let us call him Marcus. He was older, charming, a serial entrepreneur who claimed to specialize in logistics tech. I was desperate for guidance. I was lonely. I was starving for someone who spoke my language. I bought him coffee. I showed him my architecture. I explained how the cross-referencing algorithm worked. I thought I was finding a mentor. I thought I was finding an ally. 3 weeks later, I saw a press release on a tech blog. Marcus had launched a new platform called LogiGuard. I watched the demo video. It was my product. He had taken my logic, wrapped it in a slicker interface, and was pitching it to the very firms I was trying to reach. He even used my phrasing. The truth engine for logistics. I sat in my dark apartment, the blue light of the laptop illuminating my face, and I felt a physical pain in my chest. I had no patent pending, yet I could not afford the filing fees. I had no non-disclosure agreement because I had trusted him. I had nothing but screenshots and rage. I called him. He laughed. "Lydia," he said, sounding bored. "Ideas are cheap. Execution is everything. You are just a girl with a spreadsheet. I am a company. Go home." I hung up. I went into the bathroom and vomited. Then I washed my face. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror above the sink. I looked tired. My skin was pale. I had dark circles under my eyes, but the eyes themselves were different. The fear was gone. Gordon had taught me that power was about assets. Marcus had taught me that power was about leverage. I went back to my wobbly desk. I did not cry. I opened my code editor. Marcus had stolen version 1. He did not know I was already building version 2. And version 2 was not just about compliance. It was about integration. I rebuilt SlateBridge from the ground up. I made it harder. I encrypted the core logic. I added layers of authentication that required biometric verification from the drivers. But more importantly, I became a paranoid archivist. I started documenting everything, every email, every text message, every line of code. I time-stamped my commits. I recorded my phone calls with clients. I saved every receipt, every server log, every interaction. I created a digital paper trail so thick that if anyone ever tried to erase me again, they would choke on it. I did not know it then, but I was training for the trial. I was building the muscle memory that would save my life 3 years later. The turning point came 6 months after the theft. I was still broke, still eating rice, but the software was sharper. I received an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. It was a safety officer at a mid-sized shipping firm that worked with chemical manufacturers. He had heard about my pilot program with Miller's Co-op. "We have a problem," the email read. "Management is forcing us to load Class A explosives on trucks rated for dry goods to save money on permits. They are editing the manifests after I sign them. If I speak up, they fire me. If I don't, someone dies. Can your system prove the edits happened?" I wrote back immediately. Yes. I gave him a limited access key to Slatebridge. He ran the raw data from the truck's onboard computers through my system. Slatebridge instantly flagged the discrepancy. The weight distribution sensors on the axles showed a load pattern consistent with liquid canisters, while the manifest claimed pallets of paper. More importantly, my system caught the metadata change on the digital manifest. It showed exactly who had edited the file, at what time, and from which IP address. It was the Vice President of Operations. The safety officer took the report to the board of directors. The VP was fired the next morning. The firm signed a contract with me 48 hours later. It was not a massive contract, just $5,000 a month, but it was a recurring revenue stream. I sat on the floor of my apartment, holding the signed contract. I ran my thumb over the signature. Marcus had flash. Gordon had money. Brielle had charm. But I had the truth. I looked at the peeling paint on my walls and realized something fundamental. In the world I was building, charisma did not matter. Pedigree did not matter. The only thing that mattered was what you could prove. I pinned the contract to the wall above my desk. I did not celebrate with champagne. I poured myself a cup of instant coffee, sat down, and started coding the next update. They had laughed at my dream because they thought it was small. They did not realize I was building a weapon, and weapons do not need to be pretty. They just need to work. Success does not happen with a bang. It happens with the quiet, terrifying accumulation of responsibility. For 2 years, Slatebridge Systems existed in the gray space between survival and stability, but by the 3rd year, the momentum shifted. We were no longer just a startup operating out of a second-floor walk-up in Petersburg. We were a legitimate contender. I moved the company into a renovated textile mill in the Shockoe Bottom district of Richmond. It was not a glass tower like the Caldwell Meridian headquarters. It was brick, exposed beams, and open space. It smelled of coffee and ozone. I hired my first 10 employees. I did not hire them for their pedigrees. I did not care who their fathers were or which Ivy League schools they had attended. I hired them for their paranoia. I looked for forensic accountants who had been burned by corporate oversight. I looked for data engineers who lost sleep over unclosed brackets. I built a team of people who, like me, believed that if you did not document the truth, someone else would write a lie over it. We upgraded our infrastructure. I spent $80,000 on server redundancy alone. I audited every line of code my team wrote. If a function took 3 milliseconds too long to execute, we rewrote it. We were building a fortress, and I was the architect who checked every brick. In the middle of this blur of work, I found the only thing I had never planned for. I found peace in a person. I met Ethan McKenna at a Dell conference on infrastructure resilience. He was a structural engineer who designed bridges. He was quiet, steady, and utterly unimpressed by flash. He did not care about logistics dynasties. He cared about load-bearing ratios and tensile strength. We dated for 6 months, mostly over takeout food at my desk or late-night walks along the James River. We got married on a rainy Tuesday morning at the courthouse. There were no guests. There was no white dress. There was no reception with 500 people pretending to like us. We went to a diner afterwards, ate pancakes, and I went back to work by 1 in the afternoon. It was the happiest day of my life. That was also when I officially killed Lydia Caldwell. I could have taken Ethan's name, but I wanted something that felt like a shield I had forged myself. I legally changed my name to Lydia Turner. Turner was common. It was invisible. It was a name you scrolled past in a directory without pausing. To the business world, Lydia Caldwell had vanished, washed away by her own failure. Lydia Turner was a new entity, born from nothing. Then came the contract that changed everything. The Department of Transportation was cracking down on interstate hazmat tracking. They needed a third-party vendor to audit the digital logs of freight carriers moving volatile materials across state lines. The contract was worth $4 million over 3 years. The old guard, the massive consulting firms that usually won these bids, pitched expensive, clunky solutions that required months of human oversight. I pitched Slatebridge. I showed them that we could automate the audit in real time. I showed them we could catch a violation before the truck even left the terminal. We won the bid. I remember staring at the email from the procurement officer. I read it 5 times. I printed it out and held the paper in my hands just to feel the weight of it. We were now the federal watchdog. The industry reacted instantly. My name, Lydia Turner, started appearing in trade journals. Logistics Weekly ran a profile on us titled, "The New Sheriff in the Supply Chain." They called Slatebridge disruptive and unforgiving. Our software began to bite. We were flagging violations that had been standard practice for decades. Companies that relied on the gray areas overloading trucks, pushing drivers past legal hours, fudging maintenance records suddenly found their trucks impounded and their insurance premiums spiking. I was not just building a business. I was inadvertently waging war on my father's world. 80 miles away, in the manicured silence of the Caldwell estate, the tremors were starting to be felt. I learned later, through the grapevine of industry gossip, what the atmosphere was like in my father's study during those months. Gordon Caldwell was not a man who adapted to change. He was a man who crushed it. But you cannot crush an algorithm. Gordon spent his evenings pacing his study, complaining to anyone who would listen about the new compliance nonsense that was ruining his margins. He ranted about faceless bureaucrats and tech brats who didn't understand that shipping was a physical business. He was losing contracts. He was facing fines. For the first time in 40 years, the Caldwell Meridian Group was bleeding, and he could not find the wound to stitch it up. Brielle, however, was not ranting. She was watching. My sister had never been good at the actual work of logistics, but she was a savant when it came to status. She sensed a shift in the wind. She realized that the family name was losing its potency. She saw people at the country club looking at Gordon with sympathy rather than reverence. And Brielle Caldwell did not do sympathy. She started digging. She wanted to know who was behind this Slatebridge Systems that was causing so much trouble. She pulled the corporate filings. She saw the name Lydia Turner. Most people would not have made the connection. Turner is a common name, but Brielle was obsessive about anything that threatened her inheritance. She searched public databases. She looked for photos. She found a headshot of me from a tech panel in Daiichi C. It was a grainy photo, but it was clear enough. I was wearing a blazer she had never seen, and my hair was cut shorter. But I was unmistakably me. I can only imagine the moment the realization hit her. It would not have been a warm recognition. It would have been a cold, sliding sensation in her gut. The sister she had dismissed as a failure, the clerk she had pitied, was not only alive, but was the CEO of the company that was slowly strangling the family business. She did not keep this information to herself. She weaponized it. She waited for Sunday dinner. The setting was always the same roast beef, heavy silverware, and the oppressive weight of expectation. Gordon was in a foul mood, complaining about a held-up shipment in Baltimore. Marianne was trying to keep the conversation light, talking about the flower arrangements for the spring gala. "It is not bad luck, Daddy," Brielle said, cutting through her steak with surgical precision. "It is Lydia." The room went silent. Gordon froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What did you say?" he asked. "Slatebridge Systems," Brielle said, looking up with wide, innocent eyes that hid a shark's intent. "I had a feeling, so I checked. The CEO is Lydia. She changed her name to Turner. She is the one auditing your trucks. She is the one flagging your shipments." Gordon dropped his fork. It clattered against the china. A harsh, violent sound. "That is impossible," he whispered. "She is broke. She is living in some hovel." "She is not," Brielle said. "She just won a $4 million federal contract. She is rich, Daddy, and she is doing it by attacking us." This was the pivot. This was the moment where reality was rewritten to fit the Caldwell narrative. In a normal family, this might have been a moment of pride. Look, our daughter made it. She built something incredible. But in the Caldwell house, my success could only exist as a theft of their own. If I was winning, it meant I had stolen the victory from them. She used us, Brielle continued, her voice gaining strength. She used everything you taught her. She used the connections you gave her. She took the education you paid for and built a weapon to destroy this family. She owes us. Marianne let out a gasp, her hand flying to her chest. After everything we did for her, we loved her. We supported her. How could she be so vindictive? Marianne began to cry. It was her default response to complexity. By crying, she made herself the victim, which meant I had to be the aggressor. Gordon's face turned a dark, bruised purple. I offered her a job. I offered to let her work under you, and this is how she repays me by reporting my trucks to the federal government. She is jealous, Brielle said soothingly. She has always been jealous of what we have. She wants to tear it down because she knows she could never lead it. They sat there, in their dining room that cost more than my entire first year of operations, and they reframed their jealousy as justice. They convinced themselves that my hard work was actually their property. They convinced themselves that my independence was a form of embezzlement. We have to stop her, Gordon said, slamming his hand on the table. I will sue her for corporate espionage. I will sue her for theft of trade secrets. No, Brielle said. She reached out and placed her hand over her father's trembling fist. She was calm now. She was in her element. This was not logistics. This was social warfare. Trade secrets are hard to prove, Brielle said. And a lawsuit like that looks weak. It looks like we are scared of her technology. We do not want a battle of experts. She is smarter than us on the technical side. Daddy, we have to admit that— Then what? Gordon demanded. We hit her where she is vulnerable, Brielle said. She just signed a federal contract. Those contracts have strict clauses about financial stability. If a vendor is insolvent, or if they are tied up in litigation regarding debt, the government can pause the contract. She took a sip of her wine. We do not need to beat her in business, Brielle said, her voice cool and final. We do not need a better product. We just need the court to freeze her. She looked at her parents, her face glowing with the righteous purpose of the entitled. She says she is a success, Brielle smiled. Let us make the world believe she is a fraud. Let us call in the debt she owes us for raising her. The lie did not start in a courtroom. It started in the quiet, climate-controlled library of my parents' estate, where my sister sat with a stack of blank paper and a singular, poisonous objective. Brielle knew that she could not sue me for being successful. There is no legal cause of action for outshining the golden child. To drag me into court, she needed a debt, and since no debt existed, she had to manufacture one. She decided on the sum of $2 million. It was a specific number, chosen with calculation. It was large enough to sound catastrophic for a young company, but small enough to be believable as a family investment from a wealthy logistics dynasty. If she had claimed $10 million, it would have required board approval and public filings. $2 million was an amount my father could theoretically move with a signature, the kind of money a rich family might quietly slide to a struggling daughter to keep her afloat. But a lie needs paper to live. Brielle did not just tell people I owed money. She built a paper trail to prove it. She spent weeks finding documents. She sat at her vintage desk, drafting loan agreements and promissory notes. She backdated them to 4 years ago, to the time when I was living in the apartment in Petersburg, eating rice and beans. She was smart about it. She printed the documents on paper she had left in the sun for a few days to yellow the edges slightly. She folded and unfolded them to create crease lines. She wanted them to look like they had been sitting in a forgotten file cabinet, not fresh from a laser printer. Then came the digital evidence. Brielle knew that physical paper was not enough in the modern world. She needed electronic footprints. She used software to spoof email headers, creating threads that appeared to be from 4 years ago. She drafted emails from her own account, forwarding them to herself, editing the text in the body of the message to make it look like a conversation between us. Subject: Re-loan agreement. Slatebridge support. Date: October 12th. 4 years ago. Lydia. Dad and I agree. We will wire the $2 million to the holding account. Just sign the attached. We want you to succeed. But this is a loan, not a gift. Reply from Lydia. Thank you. Brielle, you are saving my life. I will sign it tonight. I never wrote that email. I never received that money. But to an outsider skimming the printouts, it looked damning. It looked like a grateful sister accepting a lifeline she now refused to acknowledge. To sell this narrative, Brielle needed a voice. She found Sterling. Sterling was not a bad lawyer, but he was a hungry one. He was the kind of attorney who had billboards on the highway and wore suits that were slightly too shiny. He was looking for a high-profile case to elevate his firm into the same tier as the corporate giants. When the daughter of the Caldwell Meridian Group walked into his office with a tale of betrayal and a stack of evidence, he did not ask too many questions. He saw a contingency fee and a chance to be on the evening news. Brielle fed him the script. She told him I was a reckless startup founder who had burned through the family's money and was now hiding assets. She painted a picture of Slatebridge not as a tech innovator, but as a house of cards held together by my father's secret charity. We do not want to hurt her, Brielle told him, perfecting the tone of the concerned sibling. We just want what is ours. We want accountability. Sterling ate it up. He drafted the petition with aggressive zeal. While Brielle handled the legal architecture, my parents rehearsed their emotional performance. This is the part that hurts the most when I think about it. It was not enough for them to sign the affidavits. They actually practiced. I learned later that they treated the upcoming legal action like a stage play. In the living room, under the portrait of my grandfather, Marianne practiced her tears. She would sit on the sofa, holding a tissue, and work on her phrasing. We gave her every chance, she would say to the empty room. We just wanted her to be safe. Gordon, meanwhile, practiced his disappointment. He stood by the fireplace, refining the furrow of his brow. He needed to look like the benevolent patriarch who had been forced into this position by an ungrateful child. It is not about the money, he would tell the heir. It is about principle. They were not just suing me, they were rewriting my history. They were taking my years of struggle, my hunger, my sleepless nights, and painting over them with a story of dependency. They were turning me back into the child they could control. The attack landed on a Thursday morning. I was in the Slatebridge conference room, reviewing the beta testing results for the new federal audit module. The mood was electric. My team was laughing, drinking coffee, pointing out how the new algorithm had caught a 98% reduction in error rates. We felt invincible. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, knocked on the glass door. She looked pale. Lydia, she said, her voice tight. There is a man at the front desk. He says he needs to see you, personally. I knew instantly. You do not grow up in the Caldwell house without developing a sixth sense for disaster. I walked out to the reception area. The man was holding a thick envelope. He asked my name. I told him. You have been served, he said, handing me the packet. He turned and left. The reception area was silent. Sarah was pretending to type, but I knew she was watching. My lead engineer was standing by the coffee machine, his mug frozen halfway to his mouth. I opened the envelope. In re. The estate of Lydia Turner. Petition for involuntary bankruptcy and relief from debt. The words swam before my eyes. Involuntary bankruptcy. They were not just suing me for money. They were filing a petition claiming I was insolvent. They were asking the court to freeze my assets and appoint a trustee to manage my company because I was allegedly unable to pay my debts. My hands went cold. It was a physical reaction, the blood draining from my extremities to protect my vital organs. I felt like I was back at the dinner table, being told to go park cars. I walked back into my office and closed the door. I sat down and read the petition. Claimant Brielle Caldwell. Amount $2 million. Nature of debt. Unpaid promissory note. I read the attached affidavit from my father. I personally authorized the transfer of funds to assist my daughter's failing venture. I felt a wave of nausea. Failing venture. Slatebridge was posting $3 million in quarterly revenue. We had zero debt. We were the healthiest company in the sector. But then the realization hit me. The danger was not that I would lose the case. The math was on my side. The danger was the noise. I looked at the date on the filing. It was public record now. Within hours. The legal bots that scrape court filings would pick this up. By tomorrow morning, it would be in the industry newsletters. CEO of Slatebridge sued by family for insolvency. The federal contract we had just won had a strict clause regarding financial stability. If the Department of Transportation thought for 1 second that Slatebridge was secretly bankrupt or propped up by contested family loans, they would pause the contract. They would launch an internal review. They would freeze payments, and for a growing tech company with a high burn rate for servers and staff, a payment freeze was death. Brielle did not need to win in court. She just needed to create enough smoke to make my partners think there was a fire. She was trying to suffocate me. I called Renee Parkman immediately. Renee was the opposite of Sterling. She was a corporate shark who swam in deep, quiet waters. She arrived at my office an hour later, wearing a suit that looked like armor. She sat across from me, reading the petition. She did not look shocked. She looked focused. "This is aggressive," Renee said, flipping through the pages. "They are going for the throat. Involuntary bankruptcy petitions are rare for a reason. If they are wrong, they can be sanctioned heavily. They must be very confident." "They are lying," I said. I was shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt like it was burning my skin. "I never took a dime from them. There is no loan. There is no note." Renee looked up. "Lydia, listen to me. The truth will come out eventually. But right now, we are fighting a perception war. As soon as this hits the news, your vendors will get nervous. Your bank might flag your credit line. The government will definitely ask questions." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We fight," Renee said. "But we have to be perfect. We cannot just say they are lying. We have to prove it so thoroughly that no one ever questions you again. I need to see everything. Your bank records from 4 years ago, your tax returns, every email you have ever sent to your sister." She pushed the packet of evidence Brielle had filed across the desk toward me. "Start with these," Renee said. "Look at the loan documents they submitted. Look at them closely. Is that your signature?" I picked up the photocopy of the promissory note. It was dated 4 years ago. At the bottom of the page, above the line marked borrower, was a signature. Lydia Caldwell. I stared at it. It looked like my signature. It had the same sharp angles, the same rushed finish. To a graphologist, it might even pass a cursory inspection. But then I saw it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled a pen out of my drawer and signed my name on a notepad. Then I put the 2 signatures side by side. "It is close," I whispered. "But it is wrong." "How?" Renee asked. "Look at the L," I said, pointing to the forgery. In the document, the loop on the capital L goes inward, crossing the vertical line. "See that?" Renee nodded. "I used to sign like that," I said. "When I was in college, when I was working at Caldwell Meridian, it was how my mother taught me to sign. It was the polite way." I pointed to my signature on the notepad. "But look at this one, the one I use now, the one I have used since I started Slatebridge." On the notepad, the L was different. It was open. It did not cross back over itself. It was a sharp, forward-leaning stroke. "I changed it," I said, the realization blooming in my mind like a dark flower. "I changed it the week I moved to Petersburg. I wanted to stop writing like a schoolgirl. I wanted a signature that looked like a CEO. I practiced it for hours until it was muscle memory." I looked back at the forged document. The date on the top was 6 months after I had moved to Petersburg, 6 months after I had changed my signature. "If I had signed this document when they say I did," I said, looking at Renee, "I would have used my new signature, the open loop. Renee's eyes narrowed. She leaned in, looking at the discrepancy. But this signature, I continued, tapping the forgery. This is the old Lydia. This is the signature of the daughter who lived in their house, the daughter who signed their birthday cards and their permission slips. I looked up at Renee. Someone traced this, I said. But they traced an old document. They found something I signed 5 or 6 years ago, maybe an old birthday card or a college form, and they copied it. They studied me, Renee, but they studied the version of me that existed before I left. Renee sat back. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a hunter who just realized the prey has walked into a trap. That, Renee said softly, is a fatal error. It proves it is a forgery, I said. It proves more than that, Renee said. It proves intent. They didn't just make a mistake. They constructed a lie based on outdated data. And if we can prove you had already changed your legal signature on your driver's license or bank cards before this date— I did, I said. I got a new license the week I moved. I remember signing the pad at the DMV with the new stroke. Renee closed the folder. The tension in the room shifted. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else— opportunity. Brielle had built a $2 million lie. She had spoofed the emails. She had aged the paper. She had rehearsed the tears. But in her arrogance, she had forgotten one thing. She had forgotten that people change. She had forgotten that the sister she was trying to destroy was not the same girl she had grown up with. She had forged the signature of a ghost. They filed this under penalty of perjury, Renee said, standing up. They just handed us a loaded gun. Lydia. I looked at the paperwork one last time. I thought of my father practicing his disappointment in the mirror. I thought of Brielle smiling as she handed this to Sterling. Let them think they have me, I said. Let them think I am panicked. Do not file the response yet. Why? Renee asked. Because I want them to commit, I said. I want them to stand up in court and swear that this is real. I want them to go all the way to the edge of the cliff before we push them. I picked up the phone to call my husband. My hands were steady now. Renee, I said, prepare the forensic expert. We are going to trial. Panic is a luxury for people who have safety nets. I did not have a safety net. I had a mortgage on a renovated mill, 52 employees who depended on me for their health care, and a family that was actively trying to incinerate my reputation. So, I did not panic. I went into evidence mode. For the next 72 hours, my office ceased to be an executive suite and became a war room. I instructed Sarah, my assistant, to cancel every meeting that was not related to keeping the federal contract alive. I told her to hold all calls. Then I locked the door, rolled up my sleeves, and began the tedious, unglamorous work of dissecting my own life. I pulled everything. I downloaded 5 years of bank statements from every account Slatebridge possessed. I printed out the general ledgers, the accounts receivable logs, and the wire transfer receipts. I pulled my personal tax returns and the company's audited financials. I turned the conference table into a sea of white paper, organizing the documents chronologically until I had a physical timeline of every dollar that had ever entered or left my control. Renee Parkman arrived on Friday morning with a man named Dr. Eris Thorne. He was a forensic document examiner who looked more like a watchmaker than a detective. He carried a heavy specialized camera case and a portable microscope. "Do not tell me what you hope to find," Dr. Thorne said as he set up his equipment on my desk. "Bias is the enemy of science. Just give me the questioned document and the known exemplars." I handed him the photocopy of the promissory note Brielle had filed with the court, along with 10 canceled checks and 3 contracts I had actually signed during that same period 4 years ago. He worked in silence for 3 hours. The only sound in the room was the hum of his laptop and the occasional click of his camera shutter. Renee sat on the sofa, reviewing case law, while I paced the length of the room, checking my phone every 5 minutes to see if the Department of Transportation had emailed about the lawsuit. Finally, Dr. Thorne sat back and rubbed his eyes. "It is a simulation," he said. His voice was flat. devoid of drama. And not a particularly good one. He turned his laptop screen toward us. On it was a high-resolution magnification of the signature on the promissory note. "Look at the ink deposition here," he said, pointing to the curve of the C in Caldwell. "And here, at the tail of the A. See these microscopic blobs? These are hesitation marks. The person signing this was not writing a name they have written 10,000 times. They were drawing a picture of a signature. They paused instinctively at the curves to check their work against a model." He clicked to the next slide, which showed a 3D topographic analysis of the pen pressure. "A natural signature has a rhythm," Dr. Thorne explained. "You press hard on the downstrokes and light on the upstrokes. It is muscle memory. But this forgery, the pressure is uniform throughout. The writer was pressing the pen into the paper with constant force because they were focusing on the shape, not the flow. It is a drawing. Ms. Turner, a forgery. I will testify to that with 100% certainty." Renee looked at me. "That is the first nail," she said. "But I needed more than a fake signature. I needed to know where the money went." The petition Brielle filed claimed that the $2 million had been wired to a specific account number on October 12th, 4 years ago. She had included a transaction receipt in her filing. It looked official. It had a confirmation number and a routing code. I sat down at my terminal and pulled up the banking records for Slatebridge again. I searched for the account number listed on Brielle's receipt. Nothing. I searched my personal accounts. Nothing. I searched the accounts of every vendor we had ever paid. Nothing. "The money never hit my books," I said to Renee. "If they sent $2 million, it went into a black hole." "Or," Renee said, tapping her pen against her chin, "it went exactly where they wanted it to go." I looked closer at the transaction receipt. The receiving bank was a regional bank in Delaware. The account holder's name was redacted on the copy they filed, blocked out by a thick black line, but the account number was visible. "Can we find out who owns this account?" I asked. "Not without a subpoena," Renee said, "which we can get, but it will take weeks. We don't have weeks." I looked at the routing number again. Then I looked at the beneficiary reference field on the receipt. It was a string of alphanumeric characters MHLLC SVC. I typed MHLLC into the Virginia State Corporation Commission database. Nothing. I tried Delaware. Nothing. I tried searching for variations. Meridian Holdings, Meridian Havens. Then I tried a different angle. I searched for the registered agent address listed on the bottom of the wire transfer form, a tiny, blurry line of text I had almost missed. It was an address in Norfolk, Virginia. I plugged the address into a real estate database. It was not a law office. It was not a bank. It was a residential address in a gated community called Ghent Square. I knew that neighborhood. My mother had friends there. I cross-referenced the address with the property tax records. The house belonged to a woman named Sylvia Prentice. My stomach dropped. Sylvia Prentice was not a banker. She was the treasurer of the Norfolk Art Society. She was my mother's best friend. They played tennis together every Tuesday morning. I searched the corporate registry for any entities tied to Sylvia Prentice, and there it was. Meridian Heights, LLC. Status active. Principal office, the Prentice residence. "Renee," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and vindication, "I found the account. It belongs to a shell company registered to my mother's tennis partner." Renee stood up and walked over to my screen. "Are you sure?" "Look," I said, pointing to the screen. "Meridian Heights, LLC. The account number matches the wire transfer. My parents did not send $2 million to me. They sent it to a shell company controlled by their friend. They moved money from their left pocket to their right pocket and claimed I stole it." "This is not just bankruptcy fraud," Renee said, her eyes narrowing. "This is money laundering. If they claimed a tax deduction for this loss..." She stopped. She pulled out her phone and dialed her paralegal. "Get me the IRS transcripts for the Caldwell Family Trust and the Caldwell Meridian Group for the last 4 years," she ordered. "And get me the filing history for Meridian Heights, LLC. I want to know if they reported this loan on their taxes." This was the trap. If my father had reported the $2 million as a loan to me on his taxes, He would have had to document the interest payments which didn't exist. If he wrote it off as a bad debt to get a tax break, he had to prove he tried to collect it years ago, which he hadn't. But if he never reported the loan at all to the IRS, then claiming it existed now in a federal bankruptcy court was an admission that he had filed false tax returns. He was trapped between perjury and tax evasion. While Renee and her team built the legal cage, I had to keep my company from falling apart. By Monday, the rumors were starting to leak. A reporter from a tech blog had called the front desk asking for a comment on the litigation. My employees were nervous. They saw the closed doors. They saw the lawyers coming in and out. I called an all-hands meeting in the break room. I stood in front of the people I had hired, the people who had trusted me with their careers. I looked at their faces, young engineers with student loans, older managers with mortgages. "You are going to hear some noise in the next few days," I told them. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "My family has filed a legal petition against me. It is a personal dispute regarding a financial claim that is categorically false. I want you to know two things. First, Slatebridge is solvent. Our money is our own. Second, I am fighting this with everything I have." "Are we going to get paid on Friday?" one of the junior developers asked. "Yes," I said immediately. "Payroll is in a segregated account. It is untouched. I promise you, as long as I am CEO, you will be paid. I will sell my car before I miss a payroll cycle." I saw the tension ease slightly, but the fear remained. They trusted me, but they knew who the Caldwells were. They knew that when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. That night, I went home to Ethan. I was exhausted. I felt like my bones were made of lead. Ethan was in the kitchen, making pasta. He had laid out a bottle of wine. When I walked in, he didn't ask how the case was going. He just hugged me. I buried my face in his chest and let myself breathe for the first time that day. But even his hug felt different. He was stiff. "You okay?" I asked, pulling back. "I saw the file," Ethan said quietly. He had seen the copies of the forged emails on the kitchen counter where I had left them that morning. "Lydia, they didn't just lie. They invented a whole conversation. The way Brielle wrote those emails, it sounds like she hates you." "She doesn't hate me," I said, pouring a glass of wine. "She just needs me to be the villain so she can be the hero." "That is not normal," Ethan said. He turned off the stove. "I know business can be rough. I deal with contractors who lie about cement grades. But this is your blood. They are trying to erase you. Lydia, they are trying to make it so you never existed as an independent person." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing money, but fear of the malice that was directed at his wife. "We are going to stop them," I said. "Renee found the shell company. We have the proof." "Good," Ethan said, "because I don't want them just beaten. I want them away from us. Forever." On Tuesday afternoon, 2 hours before the deadline to respond to the bankruptcy petition, Renee walked into my office. She was holding a thick binder. "It is time," she said. "We had the forensic report on the signature. We had the affidavit from the bank confirming no funds were ever received. We had the property records linking the receiving account to Marianne's friend. And most damning of all, we had the IRS transcripts. The transcripts showed that in the year of the alleged loan, the Caldwell Family Trust had reported 0 loans issued. They had, however, reported a consulting fee of $2 million paid to Meridian Heights, LLC. They had disguised the money as a business expense to lower their taxes, sent it to a shell company to hold it for Brielle, and were now claiming it was a loan to me. "Do we file a motion to dismiss?" I asked. "No," Renee said. "If we file a simple motion to dismiss, they can withdraw the petition and say it was a misunderstanding. They can walk away with a slap on the wrist." She placed the binder on my desk. "We are filing an answer with counterclaims and a motion for sanctions," Renee said, "and we are filing it at 4:59 in the afternoon." "Why the delay?" I asked. "Because the court clerk closes at 5, Renee said, a razor-sharp smile cutting across her face. "If we file now, Sterling will get the notification. But he won't be able to access the full exhibits until the court opens tomorrow morning. He will spend the entire night knowing we filed something massive, but not knowing what it is. He won't be able to call his clients and concoct a new story. He will walk into that courtroom tomorrow blind. I looked at the clock. It was 4:30. Do it, I said. Renee nodded to her paralegal. If Judge Halverson reads this carefully, Renee said, they won't just lose the lawsuit. Lydia, they will be exposed. We are handing the judge a roadmap to their crimes. I turned my chair to face the window. I looked out at the Richmond skyline, at the city where I had built my life from scratch. I thought about the rice and beans. I thought about the cold apartment in Petersburg. I thought about the $2 million sitting in Sylvia Prentice's account, funding Brielle's lifestyle while I scraped for rent. I wasn't the failed daughter anymore. I was the one holding the match. The silence in my office was not peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a submarine diving too deep. It was 10 o'clock at night on Tuesday, 12 hours before we were scheduled to stand in front of Judge Halverson. The cleaners had already vacuumed the hallway and turned off the main lights, leaving Renee and me in a pool of lamplight, surrounded by the debris of my defense. We had the forensic report. We had the tax transcripts. We had the shell company's name. We had a strong case. But in the American legal system, a strong case is not always enough. You need a narrative that makes the other side look not just wrong, but malicious. You need to turn the judge from an arbitrator into an avenger. Then Renee's cell phone buzzed against the mahogany table. It was a personal number, not her office line. She frowned, checking the caller ID, and her eyebrows shot up. She held a finger to her lips, signaling me to be quiet, and answered on speaker. This is Renee Parkman. Ms. Parkman. The voice on the other end was trembling, barely a whisper. It sounded like a woman trying to speak while standing inside a closet. This is Dawn Sutter. I don't know if you remember me. I froze. I remembered Dawn Sutter. She was the head of accounts payable at Caldwell Meridian. She had worked for my father for 22 years. She was a woman of beige cardigans and sensible shoes, the kind of employee who never took a sick day and sent handwritten thank you notes for Christmas bonuses. She was the keeper of the keys. I remember you, Dawn, Renee said, her voice dropping to a soothing, professional calm. You handled the escrow for the port expansion. I can't sleep, Dawn said. Her breath hitched. I saw the news, the filing. I saw what they are saying about Lydia. It is a difficult situation, Renee said. It is not a situation, Dawn snapped, a sudden flash of anger cutting through her fear. It is a setup, and I helped them do it. 30 minutes later, Dawn Sutter was sitting in my conference room. She was wearing a raincoat over her pajamas, her hands clutching a paper coffee cup as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. She looked terrified. She kept glancing at the door, as if she expected my father to burst in with a security team. I signed a non-disclosure agreement, Dawn said, staring at the steam rising from her cup. If I talk to you, they will sue me. They will take my pension. If you participated in bankruptcy fraud and you don't talk, Renee said gently, the federal government will do much more than take your pension. Dawn, they will take your freedom. You are a witness now, not a conspirator, but only if you tell us the truth before we walk into that courtroom tomorrow. Dawn closed her eyes. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Then she reached into her large tote bag and pulled out a silver laptop. I didn't bring the network files, she said. I am not a thief, but I kept my own notes. I always keep notes. Gordon taught me that. Document everything, he used to say. She opened the laptop and turned the screen toward us. It showed a digital calendar view from 3 weeks ago. Brielle came to my office on the 14th, Dawn said. She was frantic. She said Lydia was getting too big. She said your contract with the Department of Transportation was going to ruin everything. Why? I asked. Why would my contract ruin them? Dawn looked at me, and her eyes were full of pity. Because Caldwell Meridian is not the company you remember. Lydia, they are underwater. They have been leveraging the fleet assets to cover operating losses for 2 years. If the government starts using your software SlateBridge to audit the industry standards, they won't just catch the small guys, they will catch Caldwell. Your father has been cutting maintenance budgets to pay the interest on the loans. Your software would flag his trucks in 5 minutes. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just jealousy, it was survival. My success was an existential threat to their fraud. So they needed to stop me, I said. They needed to discredit the source, Don corrected. If you are a fraud, then your software is suspect. If you are broke, the government cancels the contract, and the industry goes back to the old way. The way your father can control. Dawn clicked a folder on her desktop. It opened a series of email drafts and scanned documents. Brielle asked me to find a transaction from 4 years ago that we could reframe, Dawn explained. She wanted something big. We found the $2 million transfer to the Prentice account. It was labeled consulting fees in the ledger. The shell company, I said. Meridian Heights, LLC. Dawn nodded. Brielle told me to create a paper trail that linked that money to you. She stood over my shoulder while I drafted the promissory note. She made me use the old letterhead. She even went to the supply closet and found a ream of paper from 5 years ago so the watermarks would match the date. She made you forge it, Renee asked. She called it recreating the narrative, Dawn said bitterly. She said, Lydia knows she owes us this money. We are just helping her remember. But the worst part was your father. I didn't want to ask, but I had to. What about him? He knew, Dawn said. He was in the room when we were printing the drafts. I asked him, Mr. Caldwell, are you sure about this? This is Lydia. And he looked at me, cold as ice, and said, She has forgotten her place. She thinks she can build a kingdom on my land. She needs to be humbled. Humbled. The word hung in the air like smoke. He didn't want justice. He didn't want money. He wanted to break my knees so I would have to crawl back to him. He wanted to destroy my company to teach me a lesson about hierarchy. There is more, Dawn said. She clicked on another file. You asked about the money, where it actually went. We know it went to the shell company, Renee said. Yes, but do you know what the shell company paid for? Dawn asked. She opened a spreadsheet. It was a breakdown of expenses for Meridian Heights, LLC. I scanned the lines. November 14th, $400,000. Blue Ridge Equestrian Center, December 2nd, $80,000. Mercedes-Benz of Virginia Beach, January 10th, $1.2 million. Caldwell Foundation Gala and Renovation Project. I stared at the numbers. That wasn't a loan to me, I whispered. That was Brielle. It was her trust allowance, Dawn said. Gordon didn't want the board of directors to know how much cash he was hemorrhaging on Brielle's lifestyle, so he routed it through the shell company as a business expense. That $2 million bought her show horses. It bought her car. It paid for that massive renovation on her wing of the estate. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical wound. They were suing me for $2 million that they claimed I stole. But in reality, that money had been spent on the very person who was sitting at the plaintiff's table. They were trying to force me to pay for Brielle's life twice, once by being the scapegoat, and twice by literally paying the judgment. They used the money to spoil her, I said, my voice shaking. And now they are using the debt to bury me. They are trying to balance the books, Dawn said. If they get a judgment against you, they can book it as an asset. It cleans up their balance sheet for the bank renewal next month. You are not a daughter to them right now. Lydia, you are a line item. You are a way to plug a hole in the deficit. Renee stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. This is not just sanctions, Renee said quietly. This is criminal conspiracy. This is tax fraud. This is perjury. If we use this, Dawn, you know what happens. The Caldwell Meridian Group ceases to exist. The FBI will raid that office before the week is over. Dawn looked down at her hands. I know. I have 18 months until I can retire. I will lose everything, but I cannot watch them do this to you. I watched you grow up. Lydia, You were the only one who ever said thank you when I brought the payroll checks." She reached into her bag one last time. "There is one more thing," she said. "I wasn't going to give you this. It feels dirty. But after today, I think you need to hear it." She pulled out a small black USB drive. "Brielle called me yesterday," Dawn said. "She was laughing. She had just come from a meeting with Sterling. She left me a voicemail because I didn't pick up. She wanted to brag." Dawn slid the drive across the polished table. It made a small hissing sound against the wood. "Play it," Dawn said. I looked at Renee. She nodded. I plugged the drive into my laptop. A single audio file appeared. Voicemail, Brielle yesterday. Wave. I clicked play. The sound of my sister's voice filled the room. It was crisp, bright, and terrifyingly casual. She sounded like she was planning a brunch, not a demolition. "Dawn, pick up. You missed the look on Sterling's face. He thinks we are going to settle for 50 cents on the dollar. Idiot. We are not settling. Daddy says we push until the judge appoints a trustee. Once the government hears she is under investigation, they will pull that contract so fast her head will spin." There was a pause in the recording. I could hear the clink of glass in the background. She was drinking. And the best part, Brielle's voice purred. "When she loses everything, she will have nowhere else to go. She will have to come home, and when she does, I am going to make her run the scheduling desk. It will be poetic. Don't you think, if we can freeze her contract, she won't just lose, she'll come crawling back?" The recording ended. I sat there, staring at the black screen. I had spent my whole life thinking they just didn't understand me. I thought they were old-fashioned. I thought they were neglectful. But this was not neglect. This was active, predatory malice. They wanted to break my legs so they could be the ones to hand me a crutch. They wanted to own me. "That is it," Renee said. Her voice was cold steel. "That is the kill shot." She reached over and pulled the USB drive from my computer. "I am going to file a supplemental exhibit list," Renee said. "I am going to list Dawn Sutter as a surprise witness, and I am going to submit this audio file for in-camera review." "Will the judge listen to it?" I asked. "Oh, he will listen to it," Renee said. "But first, we are going to let Brielle take the stand. We are going to let her tell her story. We are going to let her swear under oath that she just wants to help her struggling sister." Renee looked at me. "Can you hold it together? Lydia, can you sit there tomorrow and watch them lie, knowing you have this in your pocket?" I looked at the calendar invite on Dawn's screen. I looked at the list of expenses that showed my loan buying my sister's show horses. I heard Brielle's laugh echoing in my head. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving something harder and clearer in its place. "I can hold it together," I said. I stood up and walked Dawn to the door. She was shaking again. "Thank you," I told her. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should have called you sooner." "You called me when it mattered," I said. I went back to the conference table. Renee was already typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard, drafting the motion that would end my family's legacy. "Renee," I said. "Yeah. Make sure the referral for criminal prosecution is attached to the motion." I said. Renee stopped typing. She looked at me. "You are sure? Once we do that, there is no going back. You are sending your father to prison." I thought about the word humbled. I thought about the fraud. I thought about the safety officer who had emailed me about the explosives on the truck. "He didn't care if I went to prison for his tax evasion," I said. "He didn't care if my employees lost their livelihoods. He made his choice." "Okay," Renee said. "It is done." We worked until 3 in the morning. When I finally left the office, the air outside was cool and wet. I drove home. But I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Ethan, listening to his breathing, waiting for the sun to rise on the day that I would become an orphan. But at least I would be a free one. The air in the courtroom was not just cold. It was thin, as if the oxygen was being siphoned out by the sheer weight of the lies hanging over the plaintiff's table. Sterling, my sister's lawyer, was currently pacing back and forth in front of the bench. He was good. I had to give him that. He was weaving a story that made sense if you didn't look at the foundation. He painted me not as a villain, but as a tragedy. I was the reckless, insolvent daughter who had taken advantage of her family's generosity to prop up a company built on hype. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, earnest register. "Ms. Turner calls herself a CEO, but what is Slatebridge Systems, really? It is a startup burning cash, desperate for government contracts to survive. And when the walls started closing in 4 years ago, who did she turn to? She turned to her father. She turned to her mother. And now, when asked to repay the hand that fed her, she claims the hand never existed." In the front row, Marianne let out a soft, trembling sob. It was perfect timing. Gordon reached over and patted her hand, his face set in a grim mask of endurance. They were synchronized. They were a machine. I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded on the table, beside me. Renee Parkman was as motionless as a sniper waiting for the wind to die down. "We ask for the appointment of a trustee," Sterling concluded, placing his hand on the stack of forged documents, "to protect the creditors, to protect the integrity of the bankruptcy system, and to ensure that the Caldwell family is repaid the $2 million they so graciously lent." Sterling sat down. He looked at Brielle. She gave him a small, tight nod. She looked like a queen who had just ordered an execution and was ready for lunch. "Ms. Parkman," Judge Halverson said. He did not look at me. He was looking at the file Renee had submitted just before the clerk's office closed yesterday. "Do you have a response?" Renee stood up. She did not pace. She did not use adjectives. She simply walked to the podium and placed 3 binders on the judge's bench. The sound of them hitting the wood was heavy and final. "We do not offer a narrative, Your Honor," Renee said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "We offer arithmetic." She opened the first binder. "Mr. Sterling claims his client lent my client $2 million 4 years ago. He has submitted a promissory note as proof. Exhibit A in our filing is a forensic analysis conducted by Dr. Eris Thorne, a certified document examiner. The analysis concludes, with a 99% degree of certainty, that the signature on that note is a forgery. It is a tracing of a signature Ms. Turner ceased using 6 months prior to the alleged date of signing." Sterling jumped up. "Objection? This is a battle of experts. We haven't had time to—" "Sit down, counsel," Judge Halverson said. He wasn't looking at Sterling. He was looking at the high-resolution magnification of my signature in the binder. He turned the page. "Exhibit B," Renee continued, unbothered. "Certified bank records from Slatebridge Systems and Lydia Turner for the entire fiscal year in question. There is no incoming wire of $2 million. There is no deposit. There is no paper trail into my client's accounts. The money did not go to her." "It went to her holding company," Sterling shouted, losing his composure slightly. "She routed it to hide it." "Which brings us to Exhibit C," Renee said. She pointed to the document the judge was now holding. It was the wire transfer receipt Brielle had filed, the one with the account number I had traced to the shell company. "The plaintiff claims this account belongs to Ms. Turner," Renee said. "It does not." Judge Halverson paused. He removed his reading glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, a slow, deliberate movement that signaled a shift in the atmosphere. The courtroom went dead silent. Marianne's sobbing abruptly changed tempo. It didn't fade. It just stopped, as if someone had cut the power cord. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said. His voice was very quiet. "Do you know who owns the account ending in 442? Sterling hesitated. He looked at Brielle. Brielle was staring straight ahead, her neck rigid. I was informed it was a shell entity controlled by the defendant, Your Honor," Sterling stammered. "A company called Meridian Heights, LLC. "That part is true," Judge Halverson said. "It is called Meridian Heights, LLC. The judge picked up a piece of paper from the back of the folder the tax transcript Renee had pulled. "However," the judge continued, "I took the liberty of reviewing the supplemental evidence regarding this entity. Specifically, the tax filings and beneficial ownership forms. Gordon shifted in his seat. The wood of the bench creaked. "This court takes bankruptcy fraud very seriously," Judge Halverson said. "So I want to be clear. Mr. Sterling, are you aware that the registered agent for Meridian Heights LLC is not Ms. Turner?" I am not, Your Honor." "It is a Ms. Sylvia Prentice," the judge said. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the gallery. Marianne flinched. "And are you aware," the judge went on, his voice getting colder, sharper, "that the tax transcripts for the Caldwell Family Trust show a payment of $2 million to this entity, not as a loan, but as a consulting fee?" Sterling's face went the color of old ash. He looked at his client. He realized, in that second, that he was not the driver of this car. He was the crash test dummy. "Consulting fee," Sterling whispered. "And finally," Judge Halverson said, lifting one last document, "are you aware that in the beneficial ownership disclosure for Meridian Heights LLC, the primary beneficiary is listed not as Lydia Turner, but as Marianne Caldwell?" The silence that followed was violent. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hitting the block. The judge looked over his glasses at the front row. "So, the money went from the Caldwell Trust," the judge summarized, "to a shell company beneficially owned by Mrs. Caldwell, was written off as a tax-deductible business expense, and is now being presented to this court as a defaulted loan by Ms. Turner." Brielle's smile cracked. It didn't just fade. It shattered. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked at her lawyer, but Sterling was actively inching away from her, physically creating distance between himself and the radioactive truth coming from the bench. Gordon's jaw locked tight. The muscles in his neck were bulging. He wasn't nodding like a metronome anymore. He was staring at me. And for the first time in my life, looking at my father didn't make me feel small. It made me feel like I was watching a predator realize the cage door was closed. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice cracking, I was not privy to the tax structure. I relied on the documents provided by my client." "You filed the petition, Mr. Sterling," Judge Halverson snapped. "You signed the certification." The judge turned his gaze to Brielle. She shrank back in her chair. The smugness was gone, replaced by the raw animal panic of a child who has been caught holding the match. "Someone in this courtroom is lying to me," Judge Halverson said. He spoke the words slowly, letting them land like stones. "Someone has manufactured a debt, forged a signature, and used this federal court as a weapon to harass a business competitor." He looked at me. His expression softened, just for a fraction of a second. "And I don't think it is Ms. Turner," he said. My chest loosened. The weight I had been carrying for 4 years, the weight of being the disappointment, the failure, the messy one, it evaporated. "Clerk," the judge barked. "Yes, Your Honor." "Mark Exhibits A through F for immediate referral to the United States trustee," Judge Halverson ordered, "and send a copy of the transcript of this hearing, along with the tax records, to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force." "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "you will remain in this courtroom. We are going to discuss Rule 11 sanctions, and I suggest your clients do not leave the building." The bailiff, a large man who had been leaning against the back wall, stepped forward. He didn't move toward me. He moved toward the plaintiff's table. He stood 2 feet behind Brielle's chair, his hands resting on his belt. Brielle turned to look at our parents. She looked for the signal. She looked for the nod from Gordon, the tear from Marianne, the cue that would tell her what to do next. But Gordon was staring at his shoes. Marianne was frozen, clutching her handbag, her face pale and dry. There were no cues left. The play was over. I looked at Brielle across the aisle. Our eyes met. "Counsel," the judge said, "explain this account number." It was a rhetorical question now. We all knew the answer. The account number was the trap door, and they had just fallen through it. Judge Halverson did not slam his gavel. He did not need to. The silence in the room was already so absolute that the sound of him closing the file folder sounded like a gunshot. The petition for involuntary bankruptcy filed against Lydia Turner is dismissed with prejudice, the judge said. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. With prejudice, it meant they could not refile. It meant they could not fix the typos, find a new lawyer, and try again next week. It meant the door was not just closed, it was bricked over. But Judge Halverson was not finished. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the bench, and looked at the plaintiff's table with a gaze that could strip paint. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice devoid of any warmth, this court finds substantial evidence that this petition was filed in bad faith. The presentation of forged documents, the concealment of assets through shell entities, and the deliberate misrepresentation of tax records constitutes a fraud upon this court. Sterling, my sister's lawyer, was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He knew what was coming. I am issuing immediate sanctions against the plaintiff, Brielle Caldwell, in the amount of $50,000 to cover the defendant's legal fees, Halverson said. And I am ordering the clerk to forward the entire evidentiary record, including the tax transcripts and the forensic report on the signature, to the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia for investigation into bankruptcy fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. A gasp went through the gallery. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was federal prison time. Your Honor. Sterling yelped. He scrambled to his feet. The smooth, confident attorney from the morning session was gone. In his place was a man watching his license to practice law burn to ash. Mr. Sterling, the judge warned. I request a brief recess, Sterling said, his voice shaking. And I would like to state for the record, right now, that I had no knowledge of the provenance of the documents provided to me by my client. I was assured they were authentic originals. You signed the filing, counsel, the judge said. I relied on my client's sworn affidavit, Sterling shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Brielle. He was not protecting her anymore. He was cannibalizing her to save himself. If there has been a fraud committed, I am a victim of it as well. Your Honor, I have email correspondence from Ms. Caldwell explicitly stating that the promissory note was found in a safe deposit box from 4 years ago. I am prepared to turn over all privilege logs and communications related to the drafting of this petition to cooperate with the U.S. trustee. Brielle turned to look at him, her eyes wide with shock. She had paid him a retainer of $10,000, and he had just sold her out in under 10 seconds. You can't do that, Brielle hissed. I am your client. I am an officer of the court first, Sterling snapped back, not even looking at her. I am not going to jail for your family drama. Renee stood up. She didn't need to pile on, but she did it anyway. She wanted to make sure the coffin was nailed shut. Your Honor, Renee said, her voice calm and deadly. To assist Mr. Sterling's sudden desire for transparency, we would also like to submit the supplemental evidence provided by a former employee of Caldwell Meridian, Ms. Dawn Sutter. Renee lifted the USB drive and the transcript of the voicemail. We have testimony and metadata proving that the 4-year-old loan documents were actually created on a word processor 3 weeks ago, Renee said. And we have a voicemail recording from the plaintiff, Ms. Caldwell, in which she explicitly states her intent to use this court to freeze my client's federal contract to force a personal reconciliation. The judge held out his hand. The bailiff walked the evidence over to the bench. 3 weeks ago, the judge asked, looking at the transcript. Yes, Your Honor, Renee said. It was not a recovery of a debt. It was a tactical fabrication designed to inflict reputational damage. Judge Halverson looked at Brielle. He looked at her with an expression of profound disgust. Ms. Caldwell, the judge said, you used this court as a weapon. You wasted the taxpayers' money. You mocked the judicial process. Brielle shrank into her chair. She looked small. She looked young. For the first time in her life, her money was not a shield. It was an anchor dragging her down. Then, Gordon stood up. My father rose to his full height. He buttoned his jacket. He looked around the room, expecting the authority he commanded in his boardroom to translate here. He assumed that if he spoke firmly enough, the world would correct itself. "Now, see here," Gordon boomed, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. "This has gone far enough. We withdrew the claim. We are done here. This is a family matter. My daughter Lydia is stubborn, and we perhaps took extreme measures to bring her back to the fold. But this talk of criminal referrals is absurd. We are the Caldwells." He said it like it was a magic spell. "We are the Caldwells." Judge Halverson did not blink. "Sit down, sir," the judge said. "I will not," Gordon said, his face reddening. "I am the chairman of—" "Bailiff," the judge said calmly. The large officer took 2 steps toward my father. He put a hand on his belt. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Halverson said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You are not a chairman in this room. You are a witness who is dangerously close to being held in contempt. This is not a family counseling session. This is a federal court, and you have just admitted, on the record, to taking extreme measures involving false filings. Sit down and shut up, or I will have you taken into custody right now." Gordon froze. He looked at the bailiff. He looked at the judge. He looked at the gallery full of reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. He sat down. He slumped, the air hissing out of him. The granite statue had cracked. Then it was my mother's turn. Marianne had stopped crying. The performance was over. She wiped her eyes with her linen handkerchief, but when she looked at me, there was no sadness. There was only pure, distilled venom. "You happy now?" she shouted across the quiet room. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the decorum. "You humiliated us. Are you happy? Lydia, you dragged our name through the mud because you couldn't just do what you were told." "Mrs. Caldwell," the judge barked. "She is selfish," Marianne screamed, standing up, her hands clutching her purse like a weapon. "We gave her everything, and she exposes us like this to strangers for what? For money." The mask had slipped completely. She wasn't the grieving mother. She was the socialite terrified of the gossip column. She didn't care that her daughter had almost lost her livelihood. She cared that her friends at the tennis club would know her husband was a fraud. "Remove her," the judge ordered. The bailiff moved quickly. He took Marianne by the elbow. "Don't touch me." She shrieked. "Lydia, tell them to stop. You are ruining the family." I watched her being led out of the courtroom. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel guilt. I felt a strange, clinical detachment. I was watching a stranger have a tantrum. "I am sorry, Your Honor," Renee said softly. "It is not your fault." "Counsel," Judge Halverson said. He looked exhausted. He looked down at Brielle, who was now sitting alone at the table, Sterling having moved to the benches in the back. "Ms. Caldwell," the judge said, "I suggest you hire criminal defense counsel. Today." He slammed the gavel. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted. The reporters in the back row trampled over each other to get to the doors. I could hear snippets of their phone calls as they ran out. "Editor, scrap the insolvent CEO piece. The judge just referred the family for fraud." "Yeah, the father too. It is a bloodbath in here. Get me a camera crew to the front steps, now." Renee closed her binder. She turned to me. She didn't smile. She just nodded. "We did it," she said. "Is it over?" I asked. "The bankruptcy is over," Renee said. The war just moved to a new battlefield, but this time, the U.S. government is fighting it for you." We waited 10 minutes for the crowd to thin out. I didn't want to walk out in the middle of the chaos. I wanted to breathe. Ethan was waiting for me in the hallway. He had been sitting in the back row. He walked over and took my hand. His grip was tight. "Let's go home," he said. We walked out of the courtroom doors and into the marble corridor. Brielle was there. She was standing near the elevators, alone. Sterling had already fled. Gordon was likely in the bathroom trying to wash the humiliation off his face. Marianne had been escorted out. Brielle looked at me. Her face was pale, stripped of makeup by her tears. But her eyes were still hard. She was cornered, but she was still a Caldwell. She didn't know how to lose. She only knew how to escalate. She stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the exit. "You think you won," Brielle hissed. Her voice was a jagged whisper. "You think because some judge signed a paper, you are safe. You have no idea what Daddy can do. He knows people. Lydia, powerful people. I still have ways to hurt you." I looked at her. I looked at the sister I had spent 30 years trying to please. I saw the fear behind the threat. I saw the little girl who had never been told no, terrified of a world where rules applied to her. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Renee stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She just looked at Brielle with the cool, professional indifference of a lawyer who holds all the cards. "Not anymore," Renee said. Renee pointed to the glass doors at the end of the hall. Through the glass, we could see the swarm of reporters waiting on the steps. We could see the flashing lights of a police cruiser pulling up to the curb. "Out there," Renee said to Brielle, "you are not the golden child. You are a suspect. And if you say one more word to my client, I will have your bail revoked before it is even set." Brielle looked at the doors. She looked at the police lights. For the first time, the reality of the world crashed into her. She stepped aside. I walked past her. I didn't look back. I walked out the doors, into the bright, blinding sun of a Richmond afternoon. And for the first time in my life, I didn't check to see if my family was watching. It has been 21 days since the bankruptcy petition was dismissed. But the war did not end when the gavel came down. It simply changed venues. We were no longer in the civil courtroom with its mahogany panels and polite clerks. We were now in a drab, fluorescent-lit hearing room 3 floors down, where the air smelled of stale coffee and desperation. This was the domain of the federal prosecutors. I sat at a metal table next to Renee. Across from us sat the remnants of the Caldwell dynasty. In just 3 weeks, they had aged 10 years. My father, Gordon, looked smaller. His suit, usually tailored to within an inch of its life, hung loosely on his shoulders. He was not wearing his signature gold cufflinks. My mother, Mary Ann, was staring at a spot on the wall, her hands trembling in her lap. And then there was Brielle. My sister was not looking at the wall. She was looking at me. Her eyes were rimmed with red, but there was no remorse in them. There was only a frantic, vibrating intensity. She looked like a trapped animal trying to calculate the distance to the door. The assistant U.S. attorney had just left the room to file the plea agreement paperwork for the tax fraud charges. We had 10 minutes alone. The bailiff stood outside the glass door, watching, but he could not hear us. Brielle leaned forward. The movement was jerky, uncoordinated. "This has to stop. Lydia," she whispered. Her voice was raspy. "You have made your point. You won. Now tell them to drop it." I looked at her, genuinely confused by the depth of her delusion. "I cannot tell the Department of Justice to drop federal indictments." "Brielle," I said calmly, "you forged documents. You laundered money. This isn't a dispute over a borrowed dress. It is a felony. It is a misunderstanding," Brielle hissed. She looked at our parents for support, but they didn't move. "We can fix this. I can sign a statement saying it was a prank, a bad joke. We can settle this as a family. I will give you the money. I will give you $50,000 if you just sign a waiver saying you don't want to press charges." $50,000, I repeated. 100,000, she countered immediately. "I can liquidate my jewelry." "Lydia, please, think about the optics. Do you really want to be the woman who sent her little sister to prison? It will ruin your reputation. People will say you are cold." I almost laughed. She was still trying to negotiate the price of my dignity. She still thought that reality was something she could buy if she just found the right number. "My reputation is fine," I said. "My company just signed a renewal with the Department of Transportation. They like that I expose fraud. They consider it a feature, not a bug." Gordon finally spoke. He didn't look up. He spoke to the table. "We didn't think it would go this far," he said. His voice was gravel. I turned to him. You filed a bankruptcy petition. Dad, you tried to freeze my assets. What did you think would happen? He lifted his head. His eyes were dull, the fire of the patriarch extinguished. We didn't mean to win, he said softly. The room went silent. What? I asked. We knew the loan documents were weak. Gordon admitted. We knew you could probably prove you didn't owe the money eventually. That wasn't the point. We just needed to stall you. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the ghost of the ruthless businessman he used to be. If the court case dragged on for 6 months, Gordon said, your government contract would have been paused pending the investigation. Your partners would have panicked. You would have run out of cash. You would have been forced to lay off your staff. I felt a cold chill slide down my spine. You wanted to bankrupt me, I said. For real. We wanted you to need us, Gordon said. If your company failed, you would have had nowhere to go. You would have come back to the firm. You would have taken the job under Brielle. You would have been home. I sat back. The breath knocked out of me. It was the deepest betrayal of all. They didn't care about the $2 million. They didn't even really care about the competition. They cared about the narrative. They could not tolerate a version of the world where I was successful without their permission. They were willing to burn down everything I had built, destroy the livelihoods of 52 families, just to force me back into the role of the dependent, grateful failure. They didn't want my money. They wanted to own the story of my life. You are monsters, I said. I didn't shout it. It was just a statement of fact. Marianne let out a sob. She reached across the table, her fingers grasping for my hand. I pulled back. Lydia, don't say that, she cried. We did this because we love you. We were worried about you. You were out there all alone, working yourself to death, living in that awful city. We just wanted you to come back to the safety of the family. We wanted to protect you from the world. She looked at me with those wet, pleading eyes that had manipulated me for 30 years. Everything we did, Marianne said, we did out of love. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had criticized my signature, who had told me my ambition was unladylike, who had spent my loan money on a renovation for her favorite child. That is not love, Mother, I said. My voice was steady, hard as diamond. That is ownership. You don't break the legs of someone you love just to keep them from walking away. Marianne recoiled, as if I had slapped her. Brielle slammed her hand on the table. Oh, stop it, she screamed. The veneer of the victim cracked, revealing the ugly, jagged entitlement underneath. Stop acting like you are some saint, Lydia. You are enjoying this. You planned this. She turned on Gordon. This is your fault, she yelled at our father. You told me to do it. You said she needed to be humbled. You said the documents would hold up. Then she turned to Sterling, who wasn't even there, screaming at the empty chair. And that idiot lawyer, he messed up the filing. He didn't check the dates. It is not my fault. She looked back at me, her face twisted in a snarl. I am the victim here. I was just doing what I was told. And now I am the one facing charges. It is not fair. I am Brielle Caldwell. I don't go to prison. She was unraveling. The golden child was finally facing a problem she couldn't charm, bribe, or bully her way out of, and her mind couldn't process it. She was blaming everyone, her parents, her lawyer, the universe refusing to take responsibility for a single action, even while the handcuffs were waiting in the hallway. Renee Parkman stood up. She had heard enough. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. She slid them across the table, right in front of Brielle. These are not negotiable, Renee said. What is this? Brielle asked, breathing hard. It is a permanent protective order, Renee said, and a formal cease and desist regarding all communication with Lydia Turner, Slatebridge Systems, and any of its employees. From this moment on, you do not speak to her. You do not email her. You do not text her. You do not mention her name in the press. Renee leaned in, her voice low and professional. If you violate this order, Renee said, if you so much as like a post on her social media, I will file a motion to revoke your bail immediately. Do you understand? Brielle looked at the papers. She looked at Gordon. He didn't look up. He was broken. She looked at Marianne. She was weeping into her hands. Brielle was alone. The door opened. The assistant U.S. attorney walked back in, followed by 2 federal agents. "We are ready," the attorney said. "Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Caldwell, Ms. Caldwell, please rise." The judge entered a moment later. It was a formality, but it was the finality I needed. He read the charges into the record: wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. "The evidence presented regarding the fraudulent bankruptcy petition is overwhelming," the judge stated, looking down at them. "The system relies on truth. When you attack that truth, you attack the foundation of justice itself." He set the bail. He set the trial dates. He ordered them to surrender their passports. It was over. The legal machinery had caught them, and it would grind them down slowly, dollar by dollar, day by day, until there was nothing left of the Caldwell Meridian Group but a cautionary tale in a business textbook. I stood up. Renee packed her briefcase. "Let's go," Renee said. We walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard my father's voice. "Lydia." It was weak. It was the voice of an old man. I stopped. I didn't turn around. "We are still your family," he said. "Doesn't that mean anything?" I stood there for a moment. I thought about the rice and beans. I thought about the nights I slept in my office chair. I thought about the audit I had run 3 days ago that showed Slate Bridge was now worth more than Caldwell Meridian had ever been. I turned around slowly. I looked at Gordon. I looked at Marianne. I looked at Brielle. "Goodbye, Mr. Caldwell," I said. "Goodbye, Mrs. Caldwell. Goodbye, Brielle." I used their names. Not Dad, not Mom, not family. I addressed them as what they were, defendants in a case I had won. I saw the flinch in Gordon's eyes. He knew what I had just done. I hadn't just said goodbye. I had severed the line. I had revoked their access to me. I turned back to the door and pushed it open. The hallway was bright. Ethan was waiting for me at the end of the corridor. He smiled when he saw me. It was a real smile, warm and safe. I walked toward him. I could hear the heavy wooden doors of the hearing room closing behind me, sealing them inside with their consequences. They had tried to write a tragedy about me. They had tried to write a story about a failed daughter who needed saving, but I had taken the pen out of their hands. They came to court to prove I was broke, so I let the records prove what they really were. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from, and what you would have done if you were in Lydia's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.